So good afternoon. I'm Raj Seshadri. I'm responsible for US issuers at MasterCard. And thrilled to be here. It's been great being here for the last couple of days. First time at the conference for me. And I'm here to introduce someone very special who's up next, Melissa Smith. Melissa joined WEX in 1997, and she's now the president and CEO of WEX. Before that, she was the CFO. She took them public. She ran the IPO as CFO, and she created a growth company that was publicly reported that she was responsible for. She is passionate about growing WEX through technology, through product, through innovation, and equally passionate about creating a place where employees can have a very rich career. She's an active member of her community in the state of Maine, and has a very long list of awards that I won't read to you. It's quite an impressive list. But I will tell you that she won the Payments.com Most Innovative Woman of the Year and the Payments Source Most Influential Woman in Payments, plus a number of other awards. So without more fuss, let me welcome Melissa to the stage.
Thank you so much. What a great venue this is. This is the first time I've had a chance to come to this. And one of the things I'm always amazed at, when you get a group of women together, how much energy you get out of that. And you get a great chance to look at fashion, and you get to learn all kinds of new and interesting things. And it's really been quite tremendous. And I was thinking last night about the fact as I was sitting at the award ceremony, how far we've come in so many ways, and how far we still have to go. And you talked last night about being in the minority. There's about 5% of women who are CEOs of public companies in the Fortune 1000 and above, and it's about the same number that are CFOs. And as Raj mentioned, when I first went public, when the company went public 12 years ago, I was the CFO. And I was young. I was 35 years old at the time. And I remember walking into rooms, meeting with investors, and I remember the reaction. I'd go into a room, I'd see the shock on their face, and then they'd try to hide it and calm down. And we'd go on with the meeting. And I always was curious about what the backstory was. And I had a chance one day, I was on a call with one of our largest investors, and they thought they had ended the call at the end of the meeting. And on the call on the other side was someone that I had worked with over the last couple of years, and a more senior person, the portfolio manager who I'd never met before. And in the room with me was our head of investor relations. So I heard the new person, the portfolio manager, say, "The CFO is a chick." And I remember at the time I couldn't breathe, at that moment of, oh no. And the head of investor relations started to try to jump on the phone. He was he wanted this moment to end. And so he lunged for the phone, and I said, no, I want to hear this. And what the person that I worked with said was, yes, and there was a pause. And then he said, but she's a geek chick. And I sat there for a minute, and I thought, well, I actually, he was saying it in a way that was clearly quite defensive, in the fact he was, trying to protect me. And I decided that maybe that wasn't all bad. It would be okay to be defined as a geek chick, and I think that was probably a good thing. And then they moved on, and they started talking about everything that we had discussed in the course of the meeting. And 12 years later, they're still one of our largest investors. And what I took away from that at the time, and still carries in some ways with me now, is this idea that while being a woman is part of who I am, I don't have to let that really dominate who I am. And meaning that I think that we are all responsible for setting our own narrative. And while we are different, and we're going to be marked as different for a period of time, being different in some ways actually is a positive. And I think a little bit back in my background, I grew up, I work in Maine. I actually grew up in northern Maine. So I grew up, if you can imagine, in a town of 400 people. So that means there's not a stoplight in the town that I grew up in. I grew up on a farm, and my parents divorced when I was 2, and my mother remarried a man who had 5 kids, and so I grew up in the middle of a very chaotic farm. And I think sometimes about the advantage of growing up in a small community is this strong sense of community, this need for everyone to contribute. And the downside is you don't get a lot of exposure to other things. But the positive part of that are things like, one of the rites of passage in my family is when you got big enough that you could see over a steering wheel, you drove the hay truck. And if you didn't do it well and you dumped the hay off the back of the truck, it didn't matter that you were less than 100 pounds and you were a girl. You got up and you picked up the hay. And that carried forward when I went into high school, this idea that I could be, and I was, a cheerleader, but I was also captain of the math team. And so this concept that you have to pick lanes wasn't something that I was familiar with growing up because you just couldn't pick lanes. There weren't enough people to do that. And I think that really shadows how I think about life, and it really, in many ways, set up an advantage for me as I went on to the rest of my career. One of the things I'm incredibly passionate about is the concept of culture. And I know that sounds a little bit like a light, fluffy subject, but if you look at any of the research, they're going to tell you how important culture is in terms of performance. And if you look at WEX's trajectory, WEX has been, now we've been public 12 years. We were in $240 million in revenue when we first went public. We were one product really domiciled in the United States. This last year, we had over $1 billion worth of revenue. We now have products that are used in over 200 countries and territories, and we have employees that are sitting in 11 countries. And so the amount of size and sphere of the company has changed dramatically, and I would say a big part of that has been really relevant to the culture that we have. And that plays out in a lot of different ways. It plays out when I go and meet with somebody, a customer, both in the United States, but I'm amazed when I go into another country. I could go into Australia and talk to a customer, and I would have this sense of connectedness that comes through their culture, which is one of my first points that I think that's really important. And I've heard people talk about that in many different ways throughout the course of the last couple of days, but connectiveness to me means that people feel like they're part of something, and it's a big part of what I hear when I talk to our employees that distinguishes us as a company, but is equally importantly when I talk to a customer, they feel a connection to the company, they feel a connection to the actual products that we have and to the employee base. And I think that there's a cycle there. How you treat employees affects how they treat the customers. If you set up mechanisms in order for people to listen, and actually to feel heard, I think that translates into much better performance. And at the end of the day, we lose less than 3% of our customers that choose to leave us each year. And I think that a large part of that has to do with this idea of being connected. And if you give examples of that, the last year, one of the customers that we won was a company called Chevron. It was a pretty big win for us. And as I was talking to them about why, one of the things that they said to me was that they felt like they were talking to themselves and negotiating with someone like them. They started the process wanting a 5-year relationship. They moved over time to a 10-year relationship, and then they added on business outside the United States. And that was largely due to this concept of culture. I think also at the same time, the idea that the company has gotten bigger has made us think about it in a little bit of a different way. In the respect, we do a lot of fun things. Some of the fun things are simple things like we actually put bikes out so that employees can bike from one location to another and have that sense. There's a picture of one of our employees there. And get that sense of connection. Video conferencing, which is the more complicated piece of making sure you get that sense of connectedness. But as we get bigger, we actually have to think more and more about a highly decentralized organization, how we create that sense of connection. So we have 35 offices around the world, and it's important to me that people feel that same experience. We take our top performers every year off-site to a location, and one of the beauties of the way that our program is designed is anybody in the company can nominate anybody else, and we take them to some place that's slightly exotic. This last year it was to Portugal. But if I talk to the award winners, which I did, and I had them each stand up and talk about their experience within the company, I was amazed and incredibly pleased to hear them each talk about the company in the same way. And that's employees that are sitting in Brazil, employees that were sitting in Europe, employees that were sitting in Asia, and as well as the United States, in different lines of business. And it all got back to that same concept of, I feel connected to the success of the company, to the growth of the company. And yeah, sometimes it feels a little bit like the duck is moving through the water smoothly, and we're the feet flapping underneath the water, making sure that it runs really effectively. But overall, there's that sense of connection. And if I tie that into what happens when things aren't going well, the last couple of years, the one piece of our business, we earn a percentage of our revenue that comes from fuel prices. It's interchange that's coming with as people actually buy fuel. So we lost about $150 million worth of revenue in a 2-year period of time. Nothing to do with the company or the company's performance. And so I had to make a choice of what we were going to do in that period of time. And one of the things I ended up doing was, in lieu of merit, giving people stock. And it was tough. Some of the conversations were tough conversations, but also ended up being much better for them in the end. Stock actually has done quite well. And I thought at the time, these are periods of time you really know more how you're doing when things aren't going well than you do when things are going well. Life is easy when performance is good and everything's great. What you really want to understand is when you're testing the fabric and fiber is when things aren't great. And that period of time in many ways was formative for us. And I had just taken over as CEO. I've been CEO now 3 years. So let's say 6 months later, fuel prices drop. We start losing, we're still making money, but we're losing a significant portion of our revenue stream. And we had to make a lot of changes in that period of time. And one of the things that I think a lot about and still do, we've got a person on our board who teaches entrepreneurship at Harvard. And when I first took over, he used to send me little case studies of why companies fail. And I tried not to take it personally, like, okay, Shikari, you tried to tell me something. And over a period of time, he's like, the thing that I want you to really contemplate is that companies often fail because they're successful and because they get really comfortable. And the idea of change is actually an important thing to really instill in the culture of the company. So in some ways, this period of time, which was very traumatic for our employees, gave me a period of time to make a number of changes. I changed my whole organization structure. I changed a number of the people that were there. I sold a couple of businesses. And I got to reset the view of our culture to get rid of the piece that grows when you're successful. The part that starts to emerge is this entitlement part of the company, where people start talking about the successes that they had 5 years ago. And I think the other part that happens is you start to hear people using words like, well, that's the way we've always done it, which then, of the things you can say to me that will make me most angry, that's the way we've always done it, is high on my list. And so we took that period of time in order to make a significant amount of change, and I think that we're seeing the benefit of that now. We had 40% growth in the last quarter that we reported. It's been a tremendous period of time for us in many ways. And I think that, again, this concept of creating a sense of connection both to your customers, to your employees, are really important to that. And the second thing that I think that's really important, and something I think about a lot, is this idea of really leaning into your fears. And I think that's important, and it ties back to what I just said about getting too comfortable. And I believe that on a personal level, and I believe it on a professional level. And I'll give you an example on a personal level. One of the things that I've been a runner for most of my life, and I got kind of bored with this idea of running. You kind of run everywhere, and I was like, okay, I think I might want to do something a little different. And so I signed up for a half Ironman. And I was like, well, I've done a marathon, that's the next step up. And I hired a trainer, and the first day out in the pool, I could not swim a length, not one lap, underwater. And the trainer, the next day I met her, and she said, I went home that night, and all I could think about is my liability here. I couldn't sleep. I had night sweats. I don't know how you're going to do this. And I'm like, just have some faith. And and she put me in the pool the next day, and I choked down, I don't know how much water in the period of time that she was there. And I would say when I did the half Ironman, which was 2 months later, I've never felt quite so proud of myself as when I got out of the water. You know, I'd swam 1.2 miles. I was about to jump on a bike. I was in beautiful California. They had talked about rolling hills, which is not rolling. You know, they were big monster hills. But I walked away with a sense of having done something I didn't think I could do. And so one of the things, you know, getting back to the WEX world that we did, we actually sponsored an all-women's triathlon that raises money for cancer research in Maine. And what I like about that same connection is I get emails from women who've done this that will say the same exact thing. I didn't think I could do it, and I'm so proud of myself that I actually accomplished a goal that I didn't think was possible. And at the same time, we raised money for, for something that I think is incredibly important. So we've been able to make a connection with the heartstrings, but also that same sense of wanting to make sure that you push yourself. And when I take that even a step further, I talked about the fact that we divested some companies in that tough period of time. We also went out and acquired a $1.5 billion company, which, I was going to say, when I was sitting across the table, I'm negotiating with a private equity person, and I'm realizing that this is what they do for a living. This is a piece of what I do for a living. And it's incredibly important to the company, how this goes. And I think that in that same band of when you put your mind to be able to do something, if you say I can, you really can. And I think the same thing's true if you think about a company. If you say we can, and you actually create focus around something, and you create the energy, it is amazing what people will pull together to do. And I think of that as a tangible result. We're in the middle of a storm. We lay into this storm the biggest acquisition we've ever done, and people have pulled through in a way that I can't even describe. And I think that's important as well, is this idea of taking risks and pushing yourself, I think is not just on a personal level, but I think that's true at a professional level. So when I think about how you actually indoctrinate all of that, and as we've gotten bigger, when we first started out as a company, some of these things were easy because we were all in one spot, and some of the cultural aspects happened organically. And as we've gotten bigger, something that I would say is almost counterintuitive is this idea that we've had to add process in to how we make sure that we're setting things up in the right way. And so as an example, we've added in integrated leadership development programs because the stakes are bigger. I can't just put somebody in any job now and see if they sink or swim, which frankly is what happened to me over time. And we were a size that we could do that. But that program assigns every VP and director a coach for a year. And that allows them someone who's independent from the company that's really vested in their career development. And that's been a really great, remarkable thing that we've done. And then at the same time, at the next level down in the organization, we have the VPs and directors be the mentors for that group, which is developmental for both sides. We formalized a mentorship program, which I've heard a lot of discussion about today, which I think is important for any business. And then something that's been really important to me is that I want to make sure that people don't have to pick between their whole life. And when I say, but I mean that your work life is a piece of who you are. And there's so many different elements to who you are. And I don't think people should have to pick from one to the other. And so some of the programs that we've added in are things like adding parental leave. I think that the United States is behind, what other countries do, and I think it was important that we made a statement that we actually allowed both men and women to take time off with their children. And we added in 2 vacation days to all employees so they could take time off and for volunteering. Because we want to make sure that we're giving both money and time in the communities that people live and work. And so that was just a follow through for something that probably always happened organically, But the bigger that we were, the more that we had to make that really a policy. We added in a sabbatical program so that people who've been there for 6 or more years can take 20 days off and go experience the world. And at the end of the day, when I think about the whole package of what we're trying to create, when you get back to culture, is this idea that people can really vest in their whole self, and then when you are in work, you're bringing the best you've got. And I think at the end of the day, that actually contributes to a really good experience to our customers. Now, one of the things that I actually don't often talk about, but I think that it's important, is this idea of not just what you say, but what you do. And people follow what you do much more than what you say. And so this concept of a whole life is something I try as hard as I can to set an example for that, and that's hard. And I'll give you a little story. When I first took the job as CEO, what I didn't know at the time was that I was pregnant. I know they probably happened about the same time I became CEO, probably the same virtual moment that, ironically, I became CEO and pregnant at the same time. And so, one of those funny conversations, and when you feel like you're a teenager again, when you have to go tell your board of directors, oh, by the way, I'm pregnant. And because there's no history of that. We did a bunch of research. We couldn't find an example of anybody who had been public company CEO. Marissa had been pregnant when she took the job, so there's no example that we could find. So we had to do all this research around disclosure. And yeah, I know, it's kind of funny. It's, again, I'm feeling like a teenager. I have to disclose not to the board, but the whole world, the fact that I'm pregnant. Which I did, right? And so I actually ended up having to do it in a very big public way, and yeah, which was really super exciting. But you kind of flash forward into some of the learnings I got from that. When I remember walking into a room of investors, I was 8 months pregnant, a house, and I would go into the room, and immediately all eyes would go to my eyes. You know, they were all trying really hard not to look. And I remember sitting at a conference table, and I'm trying to get my belly under the table, but it won't fit. And the belly's moving because the baby's moving. And you're trying to have a really normal discussion, and which we actually did. We had a really normal discussion. And there were so many examples of things that happened in the course of that pregnancy, which were, they're funny. Actually, they were really kind of funny when you kind of step back and reflect. But at the end of my pregnancy, not a single investor would talk to me about my being pregnant because, I don't think they knew what to say. But many of them, after I had my son, actually then opened up and wanted to have a conversation about it. And in the course of that whole period of time, because, again, it was quite public, I wasn't surprised by the notes I got from women, because women actually are incredibly supportive of other women. I was shocked by the number of notes I got from men. And the theme of those notes was very consistent. It was all about their daughters. And it would be one after another. It was, let me tell you how important what you're doing is to the future of my daughter. And, it's something I just never really thought of or reflected upon, and as we made our way through that cycle, I never wanted to be known just as that, even though that's a part of my life. And so when I had my twins 5 months ago, the interesting part of it is because there was no reaction, no investor sold. People were fine with it. It was a total and complete non-event from an investor standpoint. This time through, I actually didn't have to go through the public disclosure part of it. I mean, and I thought about, in many ways, it's a quiet progress, sign that it was of the things that I will do in my career and the impact you made. It actually, to an investor, they cared about the fact: am I making money or am I not making money? And the rest of it was a little bit of white noise. And so when I kind of go back to this concept of the example that we set, I think that how we do that that period of time, and actually both cycles through with my children, it's allowed me to create a much tighter connection to our employees because it made me feel much more human. And because I shared my experience with them publicly, I got so many notes from people, even this last time. I've got twin stories. I've got all kinds of twin stories now from people who wanted to tell me about their twins, which is actually helpful. And how they balance their life and concern for me and how I'm going to balance mine. And so I guess my point is that this concept of transparency, which I speak in every part of my life, is something that really translates well into the marketplace and to your employee base and to your customer base, because people want their leaders to be authentic and they want to be able to share those experiences with you. And I think that the extent that you can be real and understand, I think sometimes women think other women have got it all figured out and they're the only one that's the mess. It's kind of, we're all mess. We're all messy in our own way. You can have a great exterior, but that doesn't mean that you're not running late for meetings or you've got a mental list going through your head of all the different things I've got to do today. And oh my God, I'm trying to be present, but I've got to figure out how am I going to do this with my kid. All of that happens in our life, and I think that idea that you're open and sharing of that, and that you're striving to be a better person and to be as transparent and as you can be, I think is really important to people. And again, on that note, I know you all have flights to catch, so I am open to any questions, but I just wanted to say thank you to you all. This has been great. I know I haven't had a chance to meet all of you personally. Anyone who is interested in moving and working in Maine, I am soliciting. It is a great place to live and to work. And one of the advantages that I have now in this role is I also get to develop my board. And as we're adding people on, the concept of diversity is something that we talk a lot about. I think diversity of thought, both in an organization, but also within a boardroom, is really important. And some of that comes from just mixing it up with people who have different perspectives and different backgrounds. And so I would love to connect with any of you. And again, thank you for your time. And I'm open for questions if people have any.